Well, hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for the Entrepreneurial Lunch and Learn from the Field Center at Baruch. I'm Marlene. I'm the Executive Director of the Center. And I want to thank you all for being here for our spring seminar session. Today's session is on, pivoting during a pandemic, using your entrepreneurial mind to stay in the game. It's presented by Mike Gilvary. Mike is an experienced entrepreneur with heavy industry history in healthcare, entertainment, and consumer retail markets. As a Baruch alum, he's so generous with his time and gives back in many ways to the Field Center with workshops and mentoring. He also is teaching in the entrepreneurship program at Baruch as well. Mike, thank you so much for being with us today. Feel free to tell us a little bit more about yourself so our audience can understand your background as well.
Sure, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for being here. Thanks for those who are joining. I guess if I start at the beginning, I was an engineer academically, but I never actually became an engineer. I went right into sales and sales management, spent the bulk of my career in healthcare. I have a particular affinity to Baruch. Because when I decided to get my MBA at Baruch, I wasn't exactly sure the path I wanted to take. And then I met entrepreneurship at Baruch, really. And that's the kind of the spark that lit the fire that inspired me to leave the corporate world, start my own company, and kind of start taking that path. So more recently, I founded a startup in 2015 as a result of experiences that I had at Baruch, and also I run a consulting firm for early stage and startup companies that are looking for support.
Okay, feel free to take over the presentation and we can get started. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to talk about pivoting during a pandemic using your entrepreneurial mind to stay in the game. I am Michael Gilvary. I am an entrepreneur, consultant, advisor, and investor, angel investor. I'm the founder and president of a consulting firm for early stage and growth companies called Execu10. I'm also the co-founder of Ideon, which is a medtech wearable company founded in 2015. And I'm an adjunct professor at Baruch for strategy and management. I'm also the baby. What I mean to say is I'm the youngest. I'm the youngest. My father is the youngest of 6. My mother is the youngest of 2. And I am the youngest of 4. I have many cousins that are old enough to be my parents. I even have cousins that are probably old enough to be my grandparents. I'm the youngest person in an entire generation of my family on both sides of the family tree. And as the youngest, I got to watch the world around me unfold as I waited to be old enough, tall enough, mature enough to participate. This created a pretty serious case of FOMO, fear of missing out. One activity that captivated me as a child was mowing the lawn. I longed for this. A large gas-powered mower with large razor-sharp helicopter-type blades spinning at speeds that a child could only imagine. This was my Red Ryder, if you're familiar with A Christmas Story. And one day, well before my time, probably 11-year-old or so, as I was watching my dad from the living room window flaunt his lawn mowing skills, the desire became overwhelming. I needed to get out there. I needed to touch this machine, if only for a second. So I built up the courage. I marched outside, looking as tall and mature as I could in that moment. I interrupted my father and I said, "Can I try?" To my surprise, he responded, "Well, sure." I was shocked. I hadn't expected this. I reminded myself, play it cool. Don't let him know how shocked I was. Don't show weakness out of fear that he might change his mind. Before I knew it, I was being told how to move it forward, faster, slower, self-powered, on, blade off, foreign buttons and switches and safety protocols all the time, mostly just distracted by the idea that this was actually about to happen. And then after a blur of instruction, my father says, well, are you ready? And with unbearable anticipation of what was about to happen, unbearable anticipation of me cutting blades of grass for the first time, I said, yes, I do. I mean, I am. And he said, great, have at it, and walked inside. Hadn't anticipated this. I hadn't really thought past the question, can I try? And as you already know, I'm the youngest. But by that time, I knew the way things worked. I had just volunteered to mow the lawn for at least the next 7 years. And to me, that was an eternity. That's 70% of the time I'd been alive, and more years than I could remember. To the 11-year-old me, it was a seemingly overwhelming task for which I was entirely unprepared. We'll get back to that 11-year-old in a little bit. But first, let's talk about a problem we're all facing, for which many of us probably felt entirely unprepared: the COVID-19 pandemic. Its disruption has been vast. 223 countries, areas, and territories with cases. At one point, I think in February, 14 countries had reported no cases. 12 of them were remote Pacific islands, and experts said that likely there were cases there just undetected. It caused the largest global recession since the Great Depression, and its impact was broad: economic, political, agriculture, education, healthcare, environmental, and some things more personal: culture, lifestyle, inequality. It's a lot to unpack. I think we can agree that the disruption was monumental: more questions than answers, more challenges than solutions. But disruption is opportunity for entrepreneurs. Being an entrepreneur is about identifying problems and solving problems. And we have a whole new host of problems, don't we? We need innovators right now. And this disruption creates opportunity and space for them to work. For example, let's take a closer look at one problem, one relatively large and relatively complex problem: indoor activities. This is a graph of Google Trends for the search term indoor activities from today. And as you can see, we have a relatively steady increase of the interest of people to talk to, look, or learn about indoor activities, more so than we've probably had since the pandemic started. But it's not that simple, is it? What does indoor activities even mean? And what things do we have to do to make those things possible? Well, the vaccine plays a role, but we have to develop a vaccine. We have to roll out a vaccine. We have pharma companies. We have research and development. Does it work? We have testing. How long does it work? Who does it work for? Who does it help? Who does it hurt? Who should get it first? The places that want to have these activities can put in preventative measures. We can look at airflow, because we know that airflow decreases the probability that the virus spreads. There's cleaning protocol. So on top of HVAC systems and all the things we can do with air filtration and flow and different types of windows and spacing, we can also clean. We can have countertops that maybe are antimicrobial. Contactless solutions. How do we pay? How do we sign in? How do we show our ID? How do we say we're here? How do we avoid contact that may have been in place before this was an issue? Then there's testing and screening. We got PCRs, we have rapid tests, we have labs, we have temperature checks, urgent cares, logistics, distancing, common areas, lines outside. Who's going to come up with all these policies? Who's going to put them in place? Who's going to enforce them? It just keeps going. The list goes on and on and on. Any one of these bubbles could have dozens of subtopics beneath them and affect countless of businesses and their operations. So what do we do? When do we pivot? As a business, as an entrepreneur, when do you make a change? When do you decide that I need to make a pivot? And what type of pivot are you going to make? We know we need to change. The whole world has changed. Very few things were unaffected by this. But too much change can be harmful. Mauro Guillen, in an article for the Harvard Business Review, outlined 3 conditions necessary for a successful pivot. 1, align with at least one trend created by or intensified by the pandemic. We have to identify those trends, though, and what part of those trends affected your business. Second, laterally extend the company's existing capabilities in a way that cements its original intent. What are you good at now? What do you know how to do already? What have you done successfully or you understand better than other people that you can now expand laterally to other areas without changing too much of your original intent? And third, is there a substantial path to profitability that enhances the brand? It's expensive to pivot. It may seem simple, but it's not. People have to do different jobs. They have to be trained. Your business meetings are different. Your marketing material is different. The way you do things is different. The way you talk to customers is different. The customers you talk to are different. It's never as simple as saying, oh, we're just going to do this now. It doesn't work that way. It takes time, effort, and money to make change. So you need to have enough of a path to profitability that it's worth all of that effort, time, and money. And once it's all said and done, assuming it all went well and it was profitable and worth all the effort, in the end, the brand has to be stronger after than it was before. Otherwise, the trade-off could be brand recognition or brand value, which could be devastating to the business long term. But there are some tools that can help. Perceptual acuity. As an entrepreneur, an innovator, a thinker, an academic, you have a sense of what's going on. You have instincts, gut feeling, observations, the ability to see what's coming before it may come. Use that. Start there. What do you feel? What do you think is going to happen? Then scan your environment. Be aware of the world around you. Observe it. Look at it. Study it. Look for trends. When you've identified those trends, monitor them. Watch them. Look for changes, shifts, nuances. Look at what your competitors are doing. Look at what competition in the space is doing that you might be considering pivoting into. They could help you know what to do, what not to do, or maybe just inform an idea that you already had. Once you've observed these trends and you look at them, you can see that some of these things are obvious, right? Some of these things we don't have to think very hard. Remote work, shorter supply chains, social distancing, consumer introspection, thinking inward, and enhanced use of technology are things that are so obvious to us. We see it every day. We talk about it every day. It's every headline. But some things are a little more nuanced, a little harder to understand how it might affect business. For example, Only 13% of people are including financial planning as a New Year's resolution in 2021. That's at an 11-year low. How does that affect decision-making, consumer decision-making? How does that affect fintech? How does that affect the way people spend money or think about spending money? It's not quite as simple. Also, more than 60% of Americans said they were more stressed this year than the prior year. That's more than double what it was in 2019. How does that affect how people make decisions? How does that affect how people decide what they're going to do, what they're going to spend money on, what's important to them? What's important to them is often what people spend money on. This can be tricky, complicated. To put it more simply, hard. Remember that 11-year-old kid mowing the lawn? Well, it didn't take long before I got it stuck under a tree. And I don't just mean stuck. I mean, I was in there. I was really stuck. And I was relentlessly trying to push forward, relentlessly trying to get this thing out, pushing as hard as I could. Most of the time, the tire just spun, for those of you that are used to self-powered mowers. And when they didn't spin, when they caught for a second, I just went deeper into the tree. Desperately tried to force my way out. I was scraping my hands. Branches are hitting my face, evergreen branches, by the way. And then in one last emotional and physical push, I gave it everything I had to get it out. Epic failure. Exhausted, frustrated, hyperventilating, bleeding, although not bad. It seemed like a lot at the time. And soaked in sweat, I did exactly what you think a baby would do. I cried. I ran to my dad, who had put me in this situation in the first place. And I couldn't get it out fast enough. The mower is stuck. It's stupid. It's broken. It's junk. I quit. It was just verbal vomit coming out. Listens. He walks calmly outside, and I'm thinking, finally, great. Now he can see the devastation of what's happening here, how impossible of a situation he put me in. I'm thinking at best, he'll reach down with his superpower strength, pick it up with one hand, move it outside of the tree, and throw it in the garbage where it belongs. This is an insurmountable problem. He approaches the mower, he looks at it, he makes a few angled adjustments, he moves his body position a little bit, creates a little bit of leverage, applies some meaningful pressure, but minor, and he uses a self-propulsion and basically just drives it right out. I have been struggling with this thing for 20 minutes at least. He resolved it in seconds with a fraction of the effort. And in that instant, even as an 11-year-old, I realized two things. Number one, I was absolutely physically capable of doing what he just did. I just didn't know how. And number two, I should have asked for help way sooner. Ask for help. Being an entrepreneur can be a very lonely, challenging existence. And nobody knows that better than other entrepreneurs. And no one is more equipped to help you than someone who's already done it. Reach out to your peers. Reach out to consultants, mentors, advisors. They know what it's like to be in your shoes. They're way more apt to help than you might think. There's an entire community of people that are willing to support and help you. Baruch has systems in place that can help. There are events that you can go to get ideas, meet other people to expand your network. There's tons of free education available online for startups. There's startup groups, meetups, granted virtually, maybe someday again in person. There are tons of options and a very strong community and countless resources to help early stage companies. So use them. And if you're considering a pivot, analyze the environment, identify and monitor relevant trends to your business, make sure that that pivot contributes to the long-term success of the organization. And along the way, through the good times and the bad, remember this baby and save yourself a lot of heartache and pain, and just ask for help. Thank you.
Mike, thanks so much. I can picture you with the lawnmower stuck under a tree at this moment. Everyone, if you have questions, you could go ahead and put them in the chat and I will moderate them for Mike. Mike, you talked about asking for help for understanding what's available in resources. Is there ever a time where you need to really evaluate what's in front of you and whether pivoting makes sense, or starting over makes more sense, or moving on, and I mean away, makes more sense? Is there a time you should really look at yourself and your business and try to decide what's the right path?
Yeah, I think there's, in the startup world, there's a couple ways to think about this. The first is fail fast, right? The last thing you want to hear about is a company that's been pounding the same sand for a 10-year period, trying to make it work, and it's still not working, right? So there's a portion of, and there's a lot of emotion that goes into having a startup, to building a business on your own. There's a lot of pride in that. So it might be hard at times just to let things go that need to go. That's one for sure. Startups, because they're small and can feel like a speedboat compared to like a cruise ship, often feel like they can make a lot of changes and adjustments because they have the luxury of being a speedboat. But actually, change is very expensive and hard for early stage startups and companies because it requires a tremendous amount of effort. And it may not feel that way because it's a relatively small team, but it actually does. And I think there's this balance that, and there's no right answer for this, but the balance that has to be weighed is, when do you make these changes versus what's the effect of that change going to be, positive or negative? And that's hard. It depends on a lot of outside factors, and it depends on a lot of different things. And it's very hard to identify that moment, which is quite frankly why when I give a talk like this, I'm not necessarily saying you're going to be able to figure out this answer on your own. You probably can't. It's too complicated. It's too big. It's too difficult. So my recommendation is always to ask for help. It's tricky.
You mentioned using resources that are available. What has been one of the most helpful resources for you over your entrepreneurial journey?
I think the first realization that was helpful was there's a lot of people just like me, that I am not unique in that way of struggle, fear, self-doubt, right? There's very high highs on being an entrepreneur, and there's very low lows. Mm-hmm. So understanding that I'm not alone was step one. And then once I understood that I was not alone, it became a lot easier to find the resources I was looking for. So there's Startup New York, there's a New York Accelerator, there's the Baruch Innovation Center, there's MedStarter, there's probably 24 accelerators and innovators in New York City alone, and hundreds, if not thousands, available across the country and in almost every major city.
You're right. There's so much available. We're going to take some questions from our audience. One question is, what if we have an idea, but we don't have the money, the capital to pursue it? What would be the first step?
Well, I'll tell you something that somebody told me once, and it was eye-opening. And they said, there's always money for good ideas. So if the idea has merit, the opportunity to raise money does exist. You can absolutely bootstrap things, meaning you can use your own money to get things going, but that's not the only way to do it. So if you have an idea, the first thing you need to do is vet it. ask people in the industry, confirm, qualify the idea. And then if it is a good idea, my recommendation is usually start with a deck, put pen to paper, if you will, to try to think through the basics of a business plan. And if you get that far and things still look and feel right, take the next step and do a full business plan. There's tons of resources online. You don't need an MBA to know how to do this. And then once you have a business plan and once you have a deck, then you're in a position to start to talk to people about raising money. And the easiest place to raise money is with people that already know you and they're investing in you as a person. And there's a much lower bar for education and responsibility on the investor side. So find out what you're trying to do, how much money you need to do it, and then start close within your own personal network to see if you can reach the rest of it. If you can't, that's okay. If you don't have that network to do that, there's plenty of money out there for good ideas.
I'll also add, keep going, even if you hear the dozens of no's, there will be a yes, right?
Oh yeah, no, yeah. Raising money is an exercise in failure mostly. You don't need much though, right? You might have to talk to 200 people, but only a couple say yes, and you're good. And a lot of times, what I found is, if we're going to talk about the investor side, investors want to invest, right? So they're happy to hear ideas. It might not be for them, but they're happy to hear ideas. So it's not this environment where you're asking people to do something that they don't want to do. They want to do it. They just don't know if you're the right thing for them. And that doesn't mean it's a bad idea. They might just not invest in that type of business or that stage of business.
Another question. I know you spoke about environmental scanning. What else do you recommend to verify your product or service is relevant to consumers?
Well, I mean, I think there's plenty of resources available for you to do research online to start. I think that's a great place to start. If you're not already an expert in the space, and even if you are, there are plenty of experts out there that are either working in that space or have worked in that space. And I think you'd be shocked how many people will respond to a request for information, especially if it's only a small ask. 30 minutes, 15 minutes, I want to talk to you about this. Even if they don't know you, I still think if you wanted to talk about, distribution of consumer products in New York City, if you reached out to somebody at a large organization that does distribution in New York City, I wouldn't be shocked if they responded and took that call for a request for information.
Do you think being in a more heavily digital environment like we are in now and have been over the last year and so, has it made a difference for the better for entrepreneurs to pursue conversations and networks and access to information to really push their initiatives forward?
I think it's been a net positive for entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship in general, from an investing perspective, has used to kind of be a West Coast, East Coast thing. There's obviously other areas, but that was kind of the two pillars, and then things kind of, disseminated from there. Prior to this, you're not bound by your local network, but you're certainly influenced by your local geographic area. So it is a benefit to be in a large city like New York, Boston, Chicago, the list goes on. So for sure. Prior to this, when you wanted to meet with somebody, the expected default was in person or on the phone. And then if you got to Zoom, it was pretty relatively uncommon. Phone was very common, but Zoom is better than phone. So that's a net positive. And in person is very difficult in general. So now you could have a 30-minute conversation, 4 of them back to back, instead of 1, including travel, so on and so forth. So as an entrepreneur, whether you're raising money, learning about your product, or trying to sell your product, the more people you can get to, the better. So I think the efficiency of Zoom is probably a net positive. It just requires a new skill set to build a connection through a camera, which is much harder than building a connection in person. but
That's
better than the phone.
I agree with that, which actually leads to my next question about the value of our forward thinking in person networking and events or those actually face to face meetings that eventually will come back in due time. Do you think the intrinsic value of that will change than what it used to be prior to being in a pandemic and having to socially distance?
The in-person meetings, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just going to change the order in which people approach building a relationship, a professional relationship. So, the way it used to be was you have a phone call, and then maybe you do a Zoom if like there's multiple people, you might do a Zoom, and then maybe you meet in person is kind of the path, and then coffee or food or business meeting, whatever. I just think it's going to change now where if there's not a really good reason to meet in person, people probably won't do it.
Do
But if
you
they do, it, then that tells you something, right? It tells you that they're dedicating more than just 30 minutes to you. They're dedicating an hour and a half that it takes to do the travel and everything else.
and their health and safety, because that's always the priority in our current environment as well. Do
Yeah,
you
I think, goes without saying, right? There's that in a business relationship, likely people aren't going to risk too much of their personal health to do it. I guess there's a little bit of a lean towards the person selling the product might be more because they have more to gain than the person receiving it
Mhm.
conceptually. But yes, certainly goes without saying, this is under the assumption that meeting in person is safe and okay. And I think we'll get there, right? Because we're that's the type of creature we are. So we're a social being. So we will get there in some level. But to your point, whereas an in-person meeting used to be like a standard part of building a relationship, it's shifted a little bit. It's relevant and probably will happen at some point, but doesn't need to happen as early as it used to.
Do you think that now there's so much more digital communications and engagements, it would speed up the process for an entrepreneur from the time they're pitching and networking and trying to raise funds to actually securing those funds?
Yeah, I mean, as an entrepreneur, you want to be as efficient and effective as possible. So the Zoom communication, as an example, has helped us be certainly more efficient. We're definitely faster,
Yeah, I think so
but
too.
are we as effective? And
Mm.
that it's going to, just like when you meet somebody in person, some people are more dynamic, some people are not. It's the same on Zoom. And I think the more effort you take to turn your camera on, look at the lens, not be distracted, give your full attention, be in an environment that looks like you're taking it seriously. I think all those things help make it a little bit more effective. But I think the whole infrastructure and ecosystem certainly appreciates that things can now move a little bit faster. We just need to find a way to make it effective.
Mike, thank you so much. If we don't have any more questions from our audience, we will wrap up. I want to thank you so much, as always, for giving your time to us. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. Everyone, we will have actually another Lunch and Learn next week, Thursday. If you're free to spend some time with us, it's identifying a gap in $1 billion industry. We're going to talk to the CEO and founder of Jorn Beauty and her road to entrepreneurship from being a mom and a lawyer. So you'll get some more information from me on that. Everyone, look out in your emails for the recording and have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.